I'm going to start today with another story from college. I know that I share a lot of stories from my academic experience, but I think that was the point of my academic experience, was to teach me lessons that I can share with you through these stories. Today's story is going to revolve around the classes that I took that were specific to my degree. In the architectural engineering department at Kansas State University, there's a particular policy that you're introduced to in your freshman year. That is, you're supposed to be building a collection of notebooks. You're supposed to make these notebooks in such a way that you can reference them in your future career. You're not just there to take notes so that you can study for the tests and the homework, pass the class, and move on. They want you to take these notebooks and create a resource, a whole library of resources that you can turn to if you ever have questions in your working life. In order to encourage students to build an appropriate and usable library, they make it a policy that you recopy your notes from class into something that's a little bit neater. As a part of rewriting your notes, it was expected that you did 100% of your note-taking all in engineering lettering, or all caps, if you will. Everything was capital lettering. No lowercase letters were allowed in your notebook. I originally said, you're not going to break me. You're not going to get me to spend time pointlessly copying down notes that I may never look back at ever again. And you're certainly not going to force me to change the way that I write my letters. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the copying down of your notes and having a neat, organized book that followed the lettering policy was a huge part of your grade. So they did break me of it. Now I do still write everything in engineering-styled lettering. In the first class in particular, where they had you rewrite your notes in engineering lettering, they insisted that you use a straight edge for everything, drawings and your letters. Any letter which had a straight edge, you needed to be using a ruler and a drafting pencil in order to write down. It was expected that you included every sketch that was drawn on the whiteboard in class, redrawn neater than it was on that whiteboard. It was also expected that you didn't have any smudges or miscellaneous doodling on the side of the notebook that didn't have any purpose in the notebook. It was also expected that you didn't use any shorthand that would make it impossible for someone other than you to read your work. In engineering, and in life, it's important that when you have communication, be it written or spoken, that it is clear in such a way that it is going to convey what you want to concisely to your audience. In my branch of engineering, you communicate with a lot of written and graphical forms, so it was important that you could draw things very well. It was also important that your writing could never be misread. This is the fundamental basis behind the idea of writing everything in engineering lettering. Now, hearing this policy, hearing the rules that were involved around rewriting your notes for pretty much every class in the department, you might, if you put yourself in my shoes, feel the same kind of resistance that I did when this was pushed to me. I didn't have time, at least in my mind, I didn't have time to rewrite all of the notes. I had studying to do. I had other classes that were harder than the ones that I was taking in particular, where they really wanted you to rewrite your notes. But I cared a lot about my grades, and that was enough for me to get over the resistance that I had to taking the time, effort, and discipline to do a good job making the notebook. As people, we do try to take the path of least resistance. We do push back against change and practices, habits, if you will, that take a lot of time and energy, thought, preparation, intentionality, discipline. I think this is only natural as we're evolved to be conservative with our energy and try to dedicate our resource of time and energy into our top priorities. A major problem with this particular evolution, if you will, is we have indeed evolved way past hunting and gathering. Our energy conservation is no longer necessary in order for survival, at least not in the same capacity. Tasks such as communicating things properly or planning our goals on paper on purpose are examples of tasks that ultimately do result in more efficient use of our time. But it takes a discipline and an intentionality that we just naturally resist. This is what I had to get over in order to copy my notes down and do a good job. Later, I did end up referencing these books in my working career, even the ones that I didn't think that I was going to ever open again. And it was nice to have something that was organized where I could look up what I was trying to find, and it was written in a way that I could understand it without having to translate it. I had some classes where I wasn't required to rewrite my notes, and in those classes I didn't. Looking back at those notes as I studied for the fundamental engineering exam or the professional engineering exam, they were harder for me to read and understand. In fact, it was easier to go back to textbooks and relearn some of the material instead of trying to glean what I was thinking back when I scribbled down the notes. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, I'm going to hold up a page from one of the neater notebooks that I wrote so that you have an example. This is a fairly simple page, but it's neat enough and clean enough that you can probably read it decently well on camera. In the end, was exercising the discipline to rewrite the notes worth it? I think it was. I think it resulted in a valuable resource that I didn't fully grasp as a student, that I wasn't mature enough to fully understand. It also helped me study for the material in that class without me even realizing I was studying. I hardly had to do any preparation for the exams because rewriting the notes was enough to really enforce the material in my mind that I could remember it. I just knew what was going to be on those tests, and I knew what the answers were going to be. It made the class fairly easy. The main lesson that I want you to take away from my story today, the main lesson that I learned, was that there are some tasks, there are some things that we have to do in our day-to-day life that aren't pleasant. We're naturally going to resist them, and that is natural. It's okay to feel like, oh, I really don't want to do this. But exercising intentionality and discipline for those unpleasant tasks today can yield a fruitful future for us. They can yield a greater good for our sake and the sake of those whom we love.